Movies can have a lasting impression on you and bring back great memories. Certain images you will always remember. Things that have been with me all my life and keep getting added to with every movie I see.
I will turn this place into the fucking Wild Bunch if I think that you are fucking with me.
18th on home.
This is the end of your rotten life, you motherfucking dope pusher!
You gotta be fucking kidding.
Hello and welcome to My Celluloid Heart Podcast, Season 4, Episode 166. Wow, that's a lot. This is a podcast where we take two films that live in our head and heart, bring them together over two episodes by one topic or theme. I'm your host, Philip Duke, and I'm here by myself today. Unfortunately, Chip bought a new house, and he closed on it, and they're busy painting and moving in and doing all that good stuff. Jason was going to be on the show with me from Popcorn Promises, but I had a sick dog incident the other day and was unable to record with him. So now we are where we are. So no problem. But I did want to say, I put up on Instagram, hey, what do you guys think of this movie? We're doing Scream today. What do you think of Shocker? What do you think of Scream? And last week, the_Lee_Waddell wrote on there and said, that he liked Shocker and da-da-da-da-da. And Chip and I just kind of, thought he was a normal dude, one of my followers. And all of a sudden, I write on here on this one, and he says it's the best work he's ever done on Scream, some of his best work. And I said, what the fuck? So I look him up, and here's who Lee Waddell is. He's a stuntman, which I've always envied stuntmen. I wish I was brave enough to be a stuntman. But here's just some of his credits. So he started out in 1984, The Terminator, utility stunts, Nightmare on Elm Street, stunt performer. Like they had that first, Chip and I talked about it when we did a Nightmare on Elm Street, that body burn. Like that was the first time I ever saw a body burn. Was like, holy shit. He did like Cohen and Tate, which Joe and I love. He's a stunt driver. He did Baywatch, but he did Shocker stunts, Death Warrant, pyrotechnic stunts is what I'm talking about. Burning Man, burning full body burn. Batman Returns, utility stunts. He just did all kinds of stuff. Like I'm slowly scrolling through it. A Time to Kill, one of Chip's favorites, stunts. There's so much. Good Burger, Scream 2. So yeah, he did see I missed Scream. Stunt performer. And then in Scream 2, he was a stunt performer as well as Lee Waddell Jr. He did Mouse Hunt, U.S. Marshals. Remember they had some cool stunt. I remember him jumping onto like a bus or I think it was an L train that he jumped up. But that wasn't Lee Waddell. It was a black man doing the stunt, actually. Arlington Road, which is great. Being John Malkovich. Spider-Man, the 2002 Spider-Man stunt double. Wind Talkers, I love me some John Woo. Jarhead, Lady in the Water, he did underwater stunt coordinator. X-Men First Class stunts. So, come on, man. Like, give it up for this guy. Like, I was like, oh my God, I have like a stunt man writing on the podcast. So that's pretty cool. So I want to give him his proper props. So, I had some dog issues. My Great Dane was sick. Has ITP, which his platelets were down to 0, which is very bad. So I have to watch him and monitor him, and we have to make sure everything goes okay, and hopefully he'll build up those platelets. So we're hoping, and everything should be good. But now let's get on with the show, shall we?
You're not scared, are you?
Someone has taken their love of fear one step too far.
We know you're not the killer.
Solving this mystery
Everybody's a suspect!
is going to be murder.
Who are you?
The question is, where am I? We all go a little mad sometimes.
Scream, the new thriller from Wes Craven, rated R.
Scream from 1996. The plot: a year after the murder of her mother, a teenage girl is terrorized by a new killer who targets the girl and her friends by using horror films as part of a deadly game. Stars Nev Campbell as Sidney Prescott, David Arquette as Dewey Riley, Courtney Cox as Gail Weathers. So, for the character of news reporter Gail Weathers, the studio wanted a recognizable actress. And they auditioned Brooke Shields, which would have been kind of cool, and Janine Garofalo. Courtney Cox, who was starring in the sitcom Friends at the time, approached the production to pursue the role. She was interested in playing a bitch character to offset her nice Friends image. This image was the main reason why the producers initially refused to consider Cox for the part. Cox continued to lobby the studio as she felt she could believably play the character. Her efforts ultimately succeeded. Rose McGowan was cast as Tatum Riley. The casting director believed she best embodied the spunky, cynical, but innocent nature of the character. The studio felt the strong female cast of Campbell, Barrymore, Cox, and McGowan would help draw a significant female audience to the film. So I highly agree. All these ladies are great. And that's the thing with being on TV. Like, you don't want, as Courtney Cox, you don't want to be stuck in a box of this is who I am Monica. Just like I've always said about, the guy that played, Arnold Horshack, who was stuck in that, or Squiggy, stuck in that because they didn't kind of go out and try to go against it, or even Urkel. But Matthew Lillard as Stu Mocker, Rose McGowan as Tatum Riley, Skeet Ulrich as Billy Loomis, Jamie Kennedy as Randy Meeks. The role of Randy Meeks was contested between Jamie Kennedy and Breckin Meyer. The producers favored Kennedy, believing him the best embody the role. As he had no major roles prior to Scream, the studio wanted a more prominent actor than Kennedy to play the character. The producers were adamant that he was the best choice and successfully fought to keep him. According to Kennedy, Jason Lee and Seth Green were in the running for the role as well. So I could see both of those working. Like, Seth Green would totally be like a horror guy. Jason Lee could totally do it. Like, very cool. Drew Barrymore as Casey Becker, Henry Winkler as Arthur Himbry, Linda Blair as news reporter, and Wes Craven as Fred, the school janitor. So I don't know, the first time I saw this, if I noticed Linda Blair. Like, she shows up just to ask some questions, and she's pushed away, and you're just like, that girl looks familiar. And it's fucking Linda Blair from The Exorcist. It's awesome. And then Wes Craven, of course, you know Wes Craven. If you know this movie, he's in the hallway mopping. Henry Winkler looks out, and he looks up, and he, what? And it's Wes Craven in a red and green sweater with a hat, like, looks like Freddy Krueger. Very cool. And if you listen to Chip and I's The Nightmare on Elm Street, he got the idea of Freddy Krueger from some weird guy that he saw out on the street when he was a kid that looked really creepy and was wearing almost that outfit. So it's like, holy shit. Written by Kevin Williamson, from Dawson's Creek and all that good stuff. Scream was originally developed under the title Scary Movie by Kevin Williamson, an aspiring screenwriter. Influenced by a news story he was watching about a series of grisly murders by the Gainesville Ripper, Williamson became concerned about intruders upon finding an open window in the house where he was staying. He was inspired to draft an 18-page script treatment about a young woman alone in a house who was taunted over the phone and then attacked by a masked killer. The treatment remained as a short story while Williamson worked on another script, Teaching Miss Tingle, a thriller that he would eventually sell, but that would languish in development hell for many years. So that was the one that the girl from Dawson's Creek ended up being in Teaching Miss Tingle. I believe. Now I'm questioning it. No, that was something else. Teaching Miss Tingle was another thing that happened after Scream. Yes, I was wrong. Okay. But I think she was in it. But anyway, I'm sorry. I was thinking of this newest movie that came out by her, the ex-Tom Cruise lady. But anyway, a thriller that he would eventually sell but would languish in development hell, as I said, for many years. Struggling to pay his bills, Williamson secluded himself in Palm Springs and focused on the development of his Scary Movie treatment, hoping for a quick sale to meet his financial needs. Over the course of 3 days, some of these people can write these scripts so quick. It's like Like Breakfast Club was written in like a week. It's like, what the fuck? Over the course of 3 days, Williamson developed a full-length script as well as 2 separate 5-page outlines for potential sequels, Scary Movie 2 and Scary Movie 3. He hoped to entice buyers with the potential for a franchise. In an interview, Williamson said that one reason he focused on the Scary Movie script was because it was a film he wanted to watch, born of his childhood love of horror films such as Halloween, but nobody else was making it. So that's the thing. They say, write what you want to see. Quentin Tarantino said that. Other people say it. Write what you want to see. Write what you know. Write what you want to see. His appreciation for previous horror films became evident in the script, which was inspired by and referenced films such as Halloween from 1978, When a Stranger Calls 1979, Friday the 13th 1980, Prom Night 1980, A Nightmare on Elm Street 1984. Williamson listened to the soundtrack of Halloween for inspiration while writing the script. Excerpts from the soundtrack appear in the film. By June 1995, Williamson brought the Scary Movie script to his agent, Rob Paris, to put out for sale. Paris warned him that the level of violence and gore in this script would make it impossible to sell. Following the script's purchase by Miramax, Williamson was required to remove much of the gorier content, such as graphic depictions of the internal organs of gutting murder victims rolling down their legs. However, once Craven was secured as director, he was able to bring much of the excised content back, which is very cool, which leads us to directed by Wes Craven. This part is pretty interesting. Like, I would have liked to see Wes Craven do this movie that he was working on. But anyway, Bob Weinstein approached Craven early in the planning stages because he felt Craven's previous work in the genre that combined horror and comedy would make him the perfect person to bring Williamson's script to screen. Craven was already busy developing a remake of The Haunting and was considering distancing himself from the horror genre. So that would have been cool, because that would have been more of a thriller. If you've seen The Haunting, it's like, it's haunting. He was growing weary of what he felt was an inherent misogyny and violence in it. Craven was. Weinstein approached other directors, including Robert Rodriguez, Danny Boyle, George A. Romero, and Sam Raimi. Williamson said that they didn't get it. He was concerned that, having read the script, many of the directors believed the film to be purely a comedy. Craven was approached again, but continued to pass in spite of repeated requests. When production of The Haunting collapsed, Craven was freed from that commitment and found himself in need of a project. Meanwhile, Drew Barrymore had signed on to the film at her own request. When he heard an established actress wanted to be involved, Craven reasoned that Scary Movie might be different from other films of the genre he had previously undertaken, and he contacted Weinstein to accept the job. In June 1996, Craven spent 2 months, so this is after the film's done, he spent 2 months editing the final product. He encountered repeated conflicts with the MPAA concerning the content of scenes. He was forced to tone down or obscure the more intense scenes and overall violence to avoid an NC-17 rating, which is considered box office poison. Cinemas and retail chains often refuse to stock NC-17 titles. Although Dimension was desperate for a less restrictive R rating, but the producers felt that the demanded cuts would remove key elements from the film and reduce its quality, which is totally true. The opening scene featuring Barrymore was one of the most difficult parts to process through the MPAA, who required cuts based on its intensity. Craven lied to the MPAA, claiming he had only one take of the scene and could not replace it with something less intense. The MPAA allowed the scene. So that's something where there's a quote. Craven says, like, you know, I'm a director. I get hired to do what I do. I know how to do it. But unfortunately, I can't show what I do. So when I do it another way to get by in this instance, then I get, well, it's not necessarily a scene. It's not necessarily any blood. It's just the intensity of that opening. And so that I could see that being like, that's the whole reason why we're doing it, is to push that intensity. It's so fucking good. And then they'd be like, well, make it not so intense. Well, no, like, fuck you. Like, come on. So that's very cool that he did that. So now we're on to normally recasted. Not going to do a recasted. I'm by myself. There's too many people to recast. I'm like, no. So how did this movie come into my life? Of course, I saw the trailers. I was like, oh, and I wasn't a big horror movie fan, as Chip and I talked last week. So I was just like, oh, this looks fun. I'll go see this. Like, they're talking about movies. I like movies. I saw the commercial where he's like, like Halloween and da-da-da. And I'm like, there's certain rules for horror movies. And I'm like, oh, okay. So then I go and see it, and I loved it. And I'm like, oh, my God, because it has you guessing through the whole fucking thing. Like, it is so good. Like, is it this guy? Is it her dad? Is it the fucking principal? I don't know. But anyway, let's get to some listener opinions.
Well, you gotta have an opinion.
Well, opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one.
I hated this movie.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
I like it! Opinions vary.
CSA Blava _300890 wrote, quote, masterpiece with a heart emoji, unquote. Thele Waddell wrote, quote, my best work, fire emoji, 2 exclamation points and a hand clap emoji. And then also he wrote best movie ever with an LOL emoji. And Half Serious Pod wrote absolute classic, loved it from start to finish with a rock and roll emoji. Second Chance Movie Pod wrote best horror / slasher of the 90s, legendary status, unquote. Agreed on all counts. So great. So now, you guys ready to discuss this, walk through it, get some facts, different things? All right, here we go. High school student Casey Becker is home alone when she receives a phone call from an unknown person during which they discuss horror films. So Roger L. Jackson, the voice of the character of Ghostface, was picked at the end of several weeks of local casting in Santa Rosa where parts of Scream were filmed. The producers had originally intended to use his voice only as a placeholder, dubbing over it during post-production. They decided that Jackson's contribution was perfect and kept it. Craven described it as an, quote, intelligent and, quote, evil voice that would become irreplaceable to the series, which is so true. I wish I had that voice so I could call people, he likes scary movies. To aid their performance, Jackson was never allowed to meet the other actors, preventing them from associating a face with the menacing voice. Jackson was present on the set and spoke to actors by phone to help aid their performance, which is very cool. Like, that's how you do it. Like, so awesome. The caller turns sadistic, refusing to leave Casey alone and threatening her life. He reveals that her boyfriend, Steve Orth, is bound and gagged outside on her patio and demands she answer questions about horror movies if she wants him to live. After Casey answers a question about Friday the 13th incorrectly, which even my wife knew the answer to that, so kudos to my wife. Let's give a little hand clap to my wife for knowing. She was like, wasn't his mother? I'm like, you are correct. Steve is murdered in front of her. Casey attempts to escape, but is cornered by a person wearing a black robe and a ghost mask, who kills her before her parents arrive home to find her disemboweled corpse hanging from a tree. So this thing is so good. The way they did it, they made like a whole different body for Drew Barrymore to hang up on the thing with the guts hanging out. But it's a really good, like, they show, you can look up the face of her, like, fake torso. It's very cool to bust the area, from her shoulders up. But then the guy, they had the boyfriend is like in a chair without a back. So it's his arms and his chest and his head, but then the legs are like fake. And so and his guts and his stomach. So when they cut open his stomach, it looks cool. It's like all that little shit is like so cool for special effects and everything. And that part is so intense with her, like the parents just coming home and she's almost to the front porch and they just miss her. And then it's like, oh, if they just went outside. And then that guy hangs her up. My wife's like, that was really quick. He hung her up really quick. I said, I know. News media descend on the town in the wake of the murders, and a police investigation begins. So let's also go back to that thing of, so here's Drew Barrymore in your movie. It's kind of like a movie I was talking about a couple weeks ago called Dead and Buried, where I'm like, oh, am I following this guy? Is this a main? But he's not a main actor that I know. But I'm like, I think this is the main guy I'm following in this 1981 movie. And all of a sudden he gets tied to a post, gasoline poured all over him, lit on fire, and he dies. And I'm like, oh, I thought that was our main character. So this same thing, you're like, oh, it's a Drew Barrymore movie. I'm following Drew Barrymore. Pretty cool. Oh my God, Drew Barrymore's dead. And now you meet as Sidney Prescott struggles with the first anniversary of her mother Maureen's rape and murder. A news reporter, Gail Weathers, who Sidney vehemently despises, arrives. Gail was responsible for spreading rumors and conspiracy theories about Maureen's death, insinuating that the imprisoned Cotton Weary, who was tried and convicted of Maureen's rape and murder, was not responsible for her assault and killing. While waiting at home for her best friend, Tatum Riley, to arrive, Sidney gets a taunting phone call and is attacked by the killer. Sidney's boyfriend, Billy Loomis, arrives immediately after. So this part was cool. Like, he's in the house. She kicks him in the groin, like, runs away, like, talks about how stupid heroines are in horror movies. And then she ends up running up the stairs just like she said not to do. And it is so great because then she's followed and then Billy Loomis shows up and you're like, wait a minute. And they do that. And if you've noticed, I don't know if they did this on purpose, but when Billy Loomis first shows up before this incident, when he just goes to see her in her bedroom and he comes through the window, he's like, he knocks on the window. She's like, ah, and he's like, it's me. Like, he's saying, it's me, I'm the killer. But anyway, it was right after Drew Barrymore's killing. Anyway, it was pretty neat. When he drops his cell phone, Sidney suspects him of making the call and flees. Billy is arrested and questioned, but later, at Tatum's house, Sidney receives another ominous call. The next day, Billy is... and I love, like, Tatum and Dwight's, like... not Dwight, but Tatum and, David Arquette's, like, their whole, like, their brother and sister. It's so funny because he's like, you're supposed to respect me as an officer of the law. Mama told you that, It's like, oh, funny. The next day, Billy is released, and suspicion shifts to Sidney's father, Neil Prescott, because while she's in jail, while she's in the police station, they're like, we tried to call your father. Are you sure he's staying at the Holiday Inn? She's like, yeah, because that's what we saw in the beginning of the film, and now he's not there. And you're like, oh, shit. So now you're suspecting him. You're suspecting Billy. You're suspecting her dad. But then you're also like, what about Dewey? Dewey's his name. What about Dewey? Maybe it's Dewey. And so it's crazy. And so Williamson was going to remove a scene in the school bathroom featuring Sidney, as he felt it was awkward and out of place in the film. Craven insisted the scene should remain, and as he felt it developed the character and her relationship with her deceased mother. Williamson later confirmed that he was glad that Craven proved him wrong about the scene. So it's that scene where she's like kind of goes off in one of the stalls and she's just waiting, and you hear the girls going, yeah, she's a fucking nutcase. Like, her mom was killed and raped, and what do you expect? And she just like almost, I'm like, fucking tear out of there and beat those bitches up, but she didn't. After school is suspended in wake of the murders, the killer ambushes Principal Arthur Himbry and stabs him to death. So this is one also. So now you suspect, okay, is it Billy? Is it her dad? And then you see the principal, and he's putting on the mask, and he's kind of acting it out, and you're like, wait, maybe it is him. Like, oh my God. Like, you're really cool. Tatum's boyfriend and Billy's best friend, Stu Macher, throw a party to celebrate the school's closure. Gail attends, uninvited, as she expects the killer to strike again. Tatum's older brother, Deputy Sheriff Dewey Riley, also looks out for the murderer at the party. Tatum goes out to the garage and is cornered by the killer, and who crushes her neck with a garage door when she attempts to escape through the pet door. So again, when you saw this movie, you were laughing because she's trying to escape. The thing's closing. It's your regular comedy horror moment. But also the way she's treating him is just like she's at a party with everybody. She feels kind of safe. And this is just some dickhead wearing that mask. And she's like, whatever, dude, get out of my way. I'm trying to get in. And then all of a sudden he fucking attacks her, pulls a knife out. And she's like, what the fuck? And you're like, holy shit. So you're like, who the fuck is this? Like, you know, is it Billy? Like, what's going on? And it can't be Stu because Stu wouldn't kill his girlfriend. So who is it? Like, what's going on? It's crazy. Many party attendees are drawn away after hearing of Himbry's death, leaving only Sidney, Billy, their friend Randy Meeks, Stu, and Gail's cameraman Kenny. So you're also like, well, wait a minute. Randy likes movies. It's probably that movie geek. We all know how movie guys are. It's probably him. Here's some cool fact. Dimension Films had Bob Weinstein realize while reviewing the script that there were 30 pages, approximately 30 on-screen minutes, without a murder. So he instructed Williamson to have another character killed. Williamson included the death of the character Principal Himbry, Winkler, based on this input, and in doing so, inadvertently resolved a problem in the script's finale. Williamson had struggled to find a reason for several extraneous characters to leave a party scene so that the killer could attack, finally determining that the announcement of the discovery of Himbry's corpse would serve to remove the non-essential characters who decide to take a look at the corpse and leave the party before enabling the start of the murders. So this part is cool too. Like sometimes you're writing something and somebody else goes, how about you throw that in? And then you go, oh wow, that just opened up this whole other realm that I want to go to. Like, oh my God, that's so awesome. Or you just think of something. You're like, oh, wait a minute. If I just had the guy do this different. So it's way cool. Like that's so, like if you think about it, there wouldn't have been no murders going on. And then all of a sudden, like what? Everybody go get beer all at once. You know, like it doesn't make, or okay, party's over, whatever. So works out great. After having sex. So that's another part. So now you got Randy explaining the thing of a horror movie, all the rules for a horror movie. And he says, she'll take off her top and, they're talking about her, like they want to see boobs in Halloween that they're watching. And then it cuts to Sidney taking off her shirt and the camera pans right by Skeet Ulrich as she takes off her bra and you don't see it. And it's so funny and cool where you're like, am I going to see her boobs? Oh, I'm not. Oh, cool. I like that. You subverted expectations on that way as well. Like, holy shit. So now you're like, maybe it's Randy, but then all of a sudden there's some killings outside and you see the killer behind Randy and you're like, oh shit. Okay. It's not Randy. But now, is it the father? Who is it? Like, what's going on? After having sex, Sidney and Billy are confronted by the killer, and Billy is seemingly killed. So Billy gets stabbed, and he turns around, and he's like, ah, and she's like, ah. Sidney escapes from the house and seeks help from Kenny, the cameraman. But the killer slashes his throat, killing him. Gail crashes her van while escaping. So there's a whole thing of Sidney crawls out, and she's running, and crashes and tries to flag down the van when it comes back around, and Gail crashes her van while escaping, and Dewey is stabbed in the back while investigating in the house, with Sidney taking his gun for protection. So there's this cool part where Dewey's like, I'm going to go inside, and you're still like, maybe it's Dewey. He just showed up. It's all that stuff. He just showed up. Who is it? And I talked about this a long time ago on one of my other shows or whatever it was, Prom Night. After this movie, I went and rented Prom Night, and I watched it, and Prom Night is pretty much like this. You're like, is he the killer? Is this the killer? What's the killer? So I'm going to have to rewatch Prom Night. But then also, like Randy says in this movie, Prom Night Revisited, like either he's saying this is Prom Night Revisited, or he's saying it's a sequel to Prom Night, but that was called Bloody Mary or whatever it's called. But anyway, so Prom Night is really good. But anyway. So now you're like, maybe it's him. Then he gets stabbed in the back. And so you're like, oh, shit. And then Sidney goes and picks up the gun and goes on inside. Randy and Stu show up and accuse each other of being the killer. So they're outside. And they're like, no, he's a killer. No, he's a killer. And she just closes the door and says, fuck you both, or whatever she says. But Sidney retreats back into the house where she finds Billy wounded. After they let Randy inside, Sidney gives Billy the gun, who in turn shoots and injures Randy, revealing himself to be the killer. So now you're like, he's like, we all go a little mad sometimes. And then he's like Norman Bates from Psycho. And he shoots, and you're like, holy fuck, it was him. You're like, oh my God. Having faked his attack. Stu reveals himself to be the second killer by talking into a voice changer. Billy and Stu corner Sidney in the kitchen and discuss their plan to kill her and pin the murder spree on her father, whom they have taken hostage. All of a sudden, you're like, oh, shit. Like, it's all working out. It's like a really good mystery. It's like a whodunit. It's just fucking great. It's a good slasher. It's a good thriller. It's a good fucking whodunit. It's everything. It's so good. They also reveal that they murdered her mother and framed Cotton for it, as she was having an affair with Billy's father, which drove his mother away. Gale intervenes, enabling Sidney to escape and turn the tables on the killers, taunting them with a phone call and donning the killer's costume before knocking Billy out and killing Stu by dropping a television set on his head. So there's that cool part where, you see Stu put the knife down, he comes over, he's talking to her, fucking Billy stabs him a couple times, and he's like, okay, man, I'm getting woozy here. Like, I'm not feeling it. Like, you stabbed me too much. Like, I'm bleeding real bad. And then when she calls them, when he's like, where's the knife? It was right here. It should be right here. It's not here. I put it right here. And Billy's like, what the fuck? And they look, and she's gone. And they go to talk to Gale, and then she's gone. And then she calls them with the voice changer, hey, fucks, blah, blah, blah. And then she stops using the changer, and she's like, yeah, what's your plan now, guys? And then Billy throws the phone at the back of Stu, and Stu's like, ow, you hit me with the phone, dick. Like, so cool, so funny. Brought a lot of laughs in the theater. It was so good. And then she fights with Billy, and then she fights with Stu, and pulls that television down on his head, which, like Chip and I said before, like a little Nightmare on Elm Street, like Welcome to Prime Time, bitch. A little bit of Shocker, like go inside the TV. But anyway, electrocuting him with the TV. Pretty cool. An enraged Billy awakens and attacks Sidney, but Gale shoots and injures him. Randy is revealed to be wounded but alive, and remarks that the killer always resurfaces for one last scare. As Billy rises, Sidney shoots Billy in the head, killing him. As police arrive, Dewey, badly injured, is taken away by ambulance as Gale makes an impromptu news report about the night's events. The end. So first of all, this house looks amazing. Like, it's just cool. It's out there in the middle of nowhere. Like, it's real nice. They had to film all night. So they couldn't, like, at dawn, they had to just stop filming because, the light would come through. So it was really cool. Anyway, here are some more facts. Scream was credited with revitalizing the slasher genre in the 1990s, which was considered to be almost dead following an influx of direct-to-video titles and numerous sequels to established horror franchises of the 70s and 1980s. Scream's success spawned a series of sequels. So is there something that sticks with me in this movie? It would be, and we'll get to the other stuff that this spawned, but something that sticks with me is, of course, the Drew Barrymore thing. Do you like scary movies? What are you doing? I'm making popcorn. We're getting ready to watch a movie. Oh, I didn't know you had a boyfriend. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Oh, we're going to go out, And just that call is it's kind of playing fun, having fun. And then all of a sudden it gets serious. And it's like, listen here, bitch. And you're like, holy shit. So that part's cool. That part I always remember. I always remember Randy being so into movies. And I'm like, I'm so into movies. That's awesome. But the main thing is that the Drew Barrymore thing, of course, the ending scene of them both, their little thing, Billy and Stu back and forth, is hilarious. Matthew Lillard, always great. So, yeah, it was really cool. They had a thing at the New Beverly that they just showed, New Beverly's in Hollywood, and they just showed Scooby-Doo and Scream, and Matthew Lillard showed up for like a guest appearance and to talk about the movie. So that was really cool. Rotten Tomatoes critical consensus reads, quote, horror icon Wes Craven's subversive deconstruction of the genre is sly, witty, and surprisingly effective as a slasher film itself, even if it's a little cheeky for some. So I don't think it's too funny, too comical in that way, but it's just perfect. So I give the movie 5 out of 5 cellular hearts. I love it. It's perfect. And also the so there was, I don't think I wrote it down here, but after this came out, all of a sudden they did all those, I know what you did last summer, where they're trying to make you guess, but it wasn't as good as that. You know, they did all these they did remakes of, like they just talked about, remakes of My Bloody Valentine and all these other movies that just, you know, didn't work as well as the first, you know. So good. But anyway, in the year following the release of Scream, the film has been accused of inspiring copycat crimes and inducing violent acts. In January 1998, 16-year-old Mario Padilla and his 14-year-old cousin Samuel Ramirez stabbed Mario's mother, Gina Castillo, 45 times, killing her. The case became known as the Scream murder and fell under intense media scrutiny after the boys claimed that they were inspired by Scream and Scream 2. The pair confessed to needing the money acquired from Gina's murder to fund a killing spree, which would include purchasing 2 ghost face costumes as well as a voice changer used by the characters in the films. During their trial, Madeline Levine, a psychologist who studied the effect of violence on children, stated, quote, there were a whole bunch of reasons why they acted out that way. But did the movie provide a blueprint? ? Absolutely, unquote. The case was expected to highlight the effect of violent films on teenagers. However, presiding judge John Chorosky ordered that evidence pertaining to Scream be barred and that the case not be referred to as a Scream murder, refusing media access to the courtroom, intending that the case be tried as murder and nothing else. So this is another one I'll get to after a couple more murders, but you know, it really depends on the person. If you can watch a horror movie and understand that it's a horror movie or a slasher or a whatever and not be tricked by it or not be thinking that you can be that guy, then you're okay. If you're a little off, then maybe you shouldn't be watching these things. But I know as a kid, you don't know how these kids are going to take it. So who knows? Okay. On January 17, 1999, 13-year-old Ashley Murray was stabbed multiple times in the head and back before being left for dead by his friends Daniel Gill, 14, and Robert Fuller, 15. He was later found and saved by an elderly man walking his dog. The pair were dubbed the Scream Attackers after it emerged that they had watched Scream shortly before the attack, and drawings of the ghost face mask were found among their possessions. Their actions were additionally blamed on physical abuse, drugs, and exposure to black magic in their home life. Murray, who later testified against the pair, stated that he believed the film may have influenced the pair to attack him. So I can see that now. Now you're watching Scream, and you're either like, we want to be cool, like there's something about people that kind of go like, oh, this guy's, you know, we have it with the shootings and all that. I don't want to even get that way because we're here about a fucking great movie. But there's people that want to be famous for the only way to get famous that takes the least amount of talent is maybe to kill somebody. And it's like, oh, it's very sad that nobody can, if they took all that energy and focused in on something else, they could be brilliant and great. But anyway, let's get to one more. On May 4th, 1999, following the Columbine High School massacre and increasing news media reports on the effects of violent films, games, and other media on society, the United States Senate Commerce Committee held a hearing about Hollywood's marketing of films to youths. The committee focused specifically on horror films. The opening scene of Scream, featuring the murder of Casey Becker, was shown to the committee as an example of negative media which may be viewed by children. So again, it's like Twisted Sister said, like, these are lyrics that I sing. If some kid's gonna go off on what I said, like burn in hell, like whatever, like, then it's not my fault. You can't hold me responsible. You can't hold a movie responsible for something. Like, I've seen some fucked up movies, and of course children should not be watching these movies. So it also starts in the home, as they say. On June 3rd, 2002, a 17-year-old boy lured his friend, 15-year-old Alice Beaupierre, out of her parents' house in Saint-Sebastien-sur-Loire, France, and stabbed her 42 times while wearing a ghost face mask. He ran away when he saw a neighbor approaching, and the girl told the neighbor the name of her attacker before she died from her injuries. After being arrested, the boy told police that he had wanted to kill someone to emulate the Ghostface character from Scream. So it's like, come on, like, you know, these kids, like 17 years old, like now maybe things are different from then. I mean, that was 20 years ago, but still, it's like, come on, like, you need to know what is what. You need to know right from wrong. Some people don't have a good bearing, or they don't have good parents. The parents are just like, when we were growing up, I'm 51. My parents let me go drive around on my bicycle, drive all over, go to my friends, do all that. I was never a bad kid. Some kids are born evil, some kids aren't, but let's not talk about that. Let's talk about why Scream is great. It's great because it was written great. It's great because it was directed great. Wes Craven, like, I don't think anybody else could do it. You have Sam Raimi do it. It's not going to be, might have some fun in it, but it won't be, he'll rewrite it, he'll make it different. Robert Rodriguez, like, no, it's going to be more like The Faculty, and, you know, all that. So it works out so good. It was so great when it came out. Then they did sequels to it, and you're like, oh, maybe this will be just as good. You're still kind of like, oh, is it this guy? Is it that guy? And then you're like, oh, shit, like, I got fooled. And then as they got later on, it was like she could do star 6ix9ine, find out who was calling, all that cool stuff. But anyway, you ready to get to Phil's film favorite of the week? So the other day, on Criterion Channel, they have 80s horror movies. And, you know, that's where I watch that Buried, Dead or Alive. What did I call that? Dead and Buried. And so then my wife's like, oh, what do you want? I said, how about this or that? And she said no. And then I'm like, oh, this is a good one, this Road Games. And so I click it on for her to kind of read it. And she's like, oh, it has Jamie Lee Curtis in it? And I'm like, yeah. I go, it's got Stacy Keach. And speaking of murders, we listened to Sword and Scale. And at the beginning of Sword and Scale, Stacy Keach says, you know, the following is, you know, meant for adult audiences only, or however he says that. And so, and I go, it's got him in it. It's filmed in Australia. It's Jamie Lee Curtis. Very cool. So it's called Road Games from 1981. The plot: on the world's loneliest highway, it's not a game, it's murder. A laid-back American truck driver in South Australia starts to suspect a man driving a green van of killing young women along his route, and proceeds to play a cat-and-mouse game in order to catch him red-handed. So I give this movie 5 hearts, just like Scream. This movie, like, it starts out like he wants to stay in this hotel, and no vacancy light comes on, and he's like, oh man, now I can't stay there. So he's with his dog hanging out the next day, and he sees a guy go in with a girl that was a hitchhiker down the street that he saw when he was driving his truck. All of a sudden, the next day, the guy is up in his window looking out, watching, making sure that garbage picks up the garbage bags. And he's like, what's in that garbage bag that could be so important? And it's like, oh my God. And so then he suspects this guy in this green van. And so while he's driving, then the guy in the green van will either pass him or be right behind him, and you never see the guy's face. And it's like, who is it? And it's total game of cat and mouse. Like, is that guy the killer? And they're kind of blaming the truck driver. They're blaming Stacy Keach. He's like, it's not me. I don't know what you're talking about. So it's very good. It's a very good movie. It's made in 1981. It's filmed in Australia. It's very cool. It's got the cool feel to it. It's awesome. So there you go. I will be back on October 28th for a re-release of an episode I did in 2019. It was like August 17th or something of 2019. And I put a lot of work into it, and it explains about me. And it's called The Quentin Tarantino Effect, References and Influences. So Chip and I are we're going to be doing some Tarantino movies coming up until the end of the year. So we're going through, Reservoir Dogs and all that. But I wanted to get you guys get your juices flowing with this episode that I put a lot of work into. I was like, when did I see this movie? Why did I see this movie? Oh, because I saw Reservoir Dogs, and he talked about it in Reservoir Dogs. He wrote about it in Reservoir Dogs. Oh, Pulp Fiction. Yeah, I saw this thing because in Pulp Fiction they talk about blah, blah, blah. And I went through whole thing. So I wrote it all down. It's very good. Everybody check it out. It'll be coming out next Friday. So just remember, certain movies stick with you. They stay in your head and heart forever. So from all of us at My Cellular Heart, keep watching movies. You hit me with the phone, dick. Thank you. Goodbye.